A very good evening to all of you from Cape Town in South Africa. It's myself, Bridgetti Limbanda, and my guest, Benoit Leroy. Benoit, welcome to the show.
Evening.
Benoit is a chemical engineer with over 32 years of experience across many sectors. Benoit has a wealth of experience in water, waste, waste management, and waste energy equipment supply disciplines across most industrial sectors. He also has a very good understanding of global and regional environmental trends, technology developments, and the application thereof, along with the associated legislation driving the evolution of this sectors. He also spent the last 7 years, have I got that right, Benoit? He spent the last 7 years actively developing waste management practices that are linked to waste, energy, and water. He has also headed up several blue chip corporates and has a strong inclination for non-conformist approaches. Now, this evening, Benoit, you're wearing two hats. One is with your company. Yes, with many hats. And your other hat is the Water Shortage South Africa. So before we dive into business, can we just for a moment talk about what Water Shortage South Africa is all about and your role in Water Shortage South Africa?
Okay, Water Shortage South Africa is really about trying to mitigate the shortages we have through volunteers harnessing out of the good hearts sealed bottled water, spring water, that we're able to alleviate water shortages in various communities. We've done this over the last 2 years with 67 million liters of water delivered already without this year's efforts to communities in the Free State and Northern Cape, and strictly through donations and through sponsorships, so from a water and from a transport or logistics perspective. It was started off by Caroline, who is a housewife, and we joined by a few other key volunteers, and they asked me to head up the organization so that we can intertwine ourselves more with business. And the reason for that is that we unfortunately see the trend of shortages in our society increasing rapidly, and Cape Town is unfortunately merely a symptom of our water infrastructure failure and our lack of resilience. So we're very reliant on volunteers, sponsorships, and trying to have a national footprint, and I think it's growing very well, so that we can alleviate at the moment the vulnerable. So the elderly, the infirm, orphanages and the likes were not necessarily going to be serviced, and in our experience aren't serviced adequately when towns, villages run out of water. Obviously the Cape Town situation, it's 4 million people, and we're really specifically targeting the vulnerable only. We're not targeting the animals because there's quite a few organizations who are doing that. That seems to be very well serviced. So we're really focused, and our biggest drive at the moment is we've got a lot of drop-off points in Gauteng. We need more in other parts of the country, and we need more operational volunteers for our main transfer station at Ellis Park, which is really the hub getting down to Cape Town at the moment. We got a shipment last week of over 30 tons, so 30,000 liters, and then the Aquel donation that was arranged through our Cape Town office, where the managing director of Aquel actually drove down over the last 2 days and delivered also in the order of 30,000 tons in the first part of shipment. So in the last week, we've delivered about 60,000 tons. Our target is 500 million liters. And at the moment, it's ramping up very quickly.
It's been amazing this last 10 days. I think we were chatting about this earlier. I think since the announcement that day zero is now more of a likelihood, more of a probability, it seems like we've had a flood of donations suddenly coming to the fore. And it's just a sign of how people do come together in time of crisis. With their schools that's donated, people are dropping off water. And I know that there's currently, and it's a nice problem to have, there's a lot of water that's been dropped off. And I think you said Ellis Park is your central point at the moment in Johannesburg. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So because we've had such an overload of generous donations, and we're going to be needing a lot more, there currently is a need for a person or possibly persons, because we were discussing that earlier, to help us coordinate that water at Ellis Park, because there is someone in Cape Town who will organize the logistics here. So the person or persons who can assist at Ellis Park will liaise with Cape Town. So anyone out there, if you are able to assist at Ellis Park with receiving water, overseeing the load that's dropped off there, please won't you come forward, get in touch with Water Shortage South Africa, or leave a comment here in the broadcast. Please would you do that? Share this out if you can't personally help, but that for the moment is a need. People are always asking, how can I help? How can I contribute? So for the moment, that is one of the areas where there is a need to please assist at Ellis Park with the water that is being dropped off at that point. Is there anything else you want to share with regards to WSSA?
Yes, I think just to mention that in Cape Town, with Cape Town's disaster management team, we've got secure locations. We're obviously not going to broadcast them. And we as Water Shortage South Africa will and are making the decisions based on the list of 80 homes we already have as to how we're going to start distributing from day zero, maybe before that, depending on a few things we'll speak about later that affect business also. So it's not up to government, local, provincial, or national to decide where the water goes. They've just volunteered secure premises where we can then distribute according to what we believe are the best needs for the community. So it's completely depoliticized from that perspective and equitable.
So again, just to repeat, so it's basically going to target places like old age homes, for example, right?
Yes.
And I think the other suggestion was that neighborhood watchers possibly can also connect with you for people in their area who are vulnerable, elderly people.
Yes.
So if you are connected to a neighborhood watch, have someone coordinate a list of that people in your vicinity who are elderly and who would need water delivered to them.
Yeah.
Yes, and any donations, we welcome them from wherever they come with. It's actually a bottle of water, a 5-liter bottle of water. If you are unable to go and drop off water, what you can do is you can donate the sum of or the equivalent of a 5-liter bottle of water. And the average price for a 5-liter bottle of water currently is about 15 Rand. And in foreign currency, it's just under $3. So that is the kind of donation you can make to make a tangible difference to the water shortage that we've got in South Africa.
And we've got PayPal details on Facebook group and on our website, watershortagesouthafrica.com.
Yeah, so you can have a look at the website, and I'll also drop in the PayPal account in the comments.
Thank you.
After the broadcast. So again, if anyone's missed that, that is Water Shortage South Africa, who is coordinating water from the other provinces in South Africa to Cape Town. So our main topic for this evening is basically to have a look at how the water crisis is affecting and will affect the business community. So having spoken to a number of people, it is something that has been grossly overlooked. So in your experience, how prepared or how aware are businesses of the water crisis and how it will affect them?
Generally speaking, the level of awareness at board level with some national companies based in Gauteng is very low. And I've been busy over the last couple of weeks, and including this week, where companies have not given it, they know there's a situation developing, have not given it any thought. And that really prompted, tonight's broadcast, maybe in a series of broadcasts, to start looking at what can be done, firstly for Cape Town, which is an immediate requirement. But the other thing is also, this is a national phenomenon that is rolling out. And it's so, Cape Town is just being hit, not the first, but Beaufort West was one of the others. There's half a dozen Free State towns who have no water, villages and the like who have no water, and they haven't had. And we're just unable to get transport to these communities because they're off the media radar. So a lot of businesses have water as one of their potential systemic risks. And it's all very nice, but what are you doing about it? The level of awareness is very low. And we have to accept that as a society globally, we are quite reactionary. And South Africa is not any different. So the first thing we need to do is to generate awareness that the average business doesn't seem to be worried about the lack of water and the economic impact. Our credit rating in the city has been downgraded already because of its lowered ability to service its bonds. It's got 5 billion rands worth of bonds out there. And that's going to make water infrastructure and other related spend even more expensive now. So businesses also got to look at their supply chains. If their suppliers don't have water, can't function, don't have fuel, your business is at risk. Are your customers going to be around, for example? These are the questions we're having in boardrooms. And these are very basic, straightforward economics 101 issues. The thing is, water is undervalued, underpriced, and we have to, unfortunately, go through a situation like this for it to become maybe a bigger priority. So the awareness is the big issue. And you might say, I've got access to water tanks, I've got a few weeks or a month, this and that. What if you get no fuel? We're trying to ascertain if the fuel supply is secure at the refinery, because we do know, it's public knowledge, that the 7.5 or 8 megaliters a day or million liters a day is the cooling water that's required for the process in the petrol refinery is from the Potsdam sewage works. Sewage is one of the first things that is going to shut down, meaning the refinery, what does it have in place? They haven't broadcast anything, they haven't said anything, they haven't answered my queries that I've sent through the States, for example. So we're trying to find out, but if you have no fuel, can you operate? Because there's no water. But I think the most important thing is to examine, the supply chains and then have a look at, has anybody looked at 50 liters of water a day? And that's your total water footprint for the day. You cannot run a business and a home on that very easily. And why say, some people boast about they're doing it. Society in a town of 4 million is not geared to do that. Never mind 25 liters. So we've got a huge adjustment that we've got to get down to 50 or day zero comes forward. And at the moment, day zero, it's an arbitrary date. I say give or take a month. So it could be, if we're speaking tomorrow, if it's February, it could be next month. So awareness is needed at a senior management level, but then also we need to show as a company that we're aware of some of the high risks and we have a plan to mitigate them. And we need to plan for the worst, and hopefully it doesn't happen, and at least we're prepared. If there's no fuel or there's half the fuel available by the time we get to day zero, how are you going to operate your transport business, for example? How are you going to get food delivered from central warehousing to the retailers? We will run out of food very, very quickly before day zero. if that happens. So there's an awareness that needs to be raised at strategic level, but then also at staff level. Everybody needs to be appraised, and my suggestion is on a daily basis as to what the realities are, what the company is doing, to give some certainty to its staff and to find innovative ways of working around the constraints that we have. So most companies that are especially service related have, from an operational perspective, at shift change, they have toolbox talks. More from a SHEC perspective, need to add in the water issue, for example, as a first thing. This has to be driven, though, from a corporate perspective, from management.
I want to ask you something here, Benoit. It's one thing when you are water resilient as a family, and you are water resilient as a business. But what happens when one of those two aspects are not working well? If, for example, you have a family where the wheels have come off the bus, and for them, a priority is now to get water for their family, but at the expense of not being able to get to the office. How is one going to deal with that? Are businesses prepared for that? What will happen?
Some businesses have started this week trucking water down, logistics businesses, trucking water where they don't have weight restrictions. They're really more volumetrically constrained. So they're not dedicated haulers, and bringing water from inland so that the staff can get their 50 liters a day at work. It's a good way of getting people at work, and then people can make a plan so that when they do go home, at least they have some water, and it's not, tapping from the Cape Town system at all. So some companies can do that a lot easier than others. But what we've got to remember in all this, we need energy to do this. We need fuel. And I think the biggest risk is that Cape Town doesn't have a fuel mitigation strategy in place, and there isn't enough fuel in the rest of the country to top that up. That's why the refinery is down there. And we saw what happened with load shedding when the open cycle gas turbines took all the diesel. There was a diesel shortage in the Western Cape. And the inland refineries and the Durban refinery could not top that up adequately. So there was a shortage. Here I'm talking about total shutdown potentially between 1st of February and whenever day zero happens to be. The date, I think, is between the 12th and the 22nd, 16th of April, I think it is today. But if fuel is constrained, how do people get to work? How do you get your products delivered? How do you deliver your products, etc.? And I've seen none of this in the media or anything like that. And to me, no news is not good news. That's as big a risk as anything. And I think the other one is food. We're going to have a shortage of certain foods. There might be luxury foods inland because they're produced in the Western Cape. But I think the Western Cape might run out of certain food stuff. And if there's a shortage of fuel, can't track it in. So what are we doing? And I think the only way of finding solutions is to raise awareness. And that has to be, if you look at Andrew's group, Water Shedding Western Cape, it's got 150,000 members. There's 4 million people in Cape Town. So there's very little awareness into what is a group that's bigger than all the media put together in Cape Town. So there's a general lack of, I don't want to use the word apathy, but that's what comes to mind right now. We need to raise that awareness, and it's not just the homes, it's homes and business have to work together, and we must stop being part of a nanny state relying everything on government. It's not going to come on a plate from government. So government is one stakeholder, the household's another one, and business is the other one, and we together have to find ways. So the fuel situation, I think, is potentially a very dire one. And what we need is some sort of affirmation that they have imported reverse osmosis plants so that they can take water directly from the Atlantic Ocean and keep the refinery going, and that these plants are being put in place or have been put in place. There's absolutely nothing that I was able to find We've got some people trying in the supply chain to find also, but to me it's very, very quiet. So if the refinery shuts, Cape Town shuts down too, also to a great extent. So that to me is it's a very big risk, and all businesses, including government, need fuel. The Defence Force have their own supply secured, I'm sure, they wouldn't rely on local resources for anything. They will have their own fuel, their own staff, their own food, their own waste management, own fuel, etc., as they would in a war zone. So from that perspective, at least I think that is taken care of.
Is there anybody that you're aware of that's creating awareness or coordinating this in the business community?
The city has got a task team where I think it's through the Chamber of Commerce, where they do have some captains of industry there as stakeholders. But I've spoken to businesses that are national and they have absolutely no communication with the city. They haven't tried either. We're raising the awareness for them to start pushing from a business perspective. So I think there's been a general lack of apathy, and things are starting to stir around now in the last 10 days. So hopefully through broadcasts like this and other initiatives, we're going to be able to get business to start moving from a short-term perspective a lot quicker. There are longer-term interventions, but major interventions take time. And so from an infrastructure perspective, there are things we can do. So awareness is the first thing. The other thing is, do we have our energy sources secured? And electricity sounds fine with Kuiberg. They've got a mitigation strategic plan in place. Now it's just the fuel. And then also from a water perspective, if we're able to get 500 million liters a week, we'll be able to look after a good portion of the vulnerable folk. But the reality is at 50 liters per day, the economy starts to slow down. At 25 liters per day, there is no economy. There's 4 million people there, probably of which 1 million are used to living at 25 to 50 liters. City folk are not used to this. And it's absolutely, when the sewage system stops, for example, at those rates at 50 liters, the sewage system will start crashing, despite some technical efforts that have been stated. People are going to be scurrying around to make sure they've got food and water, and business needs to find ways to keep people at work and get people to come to work, despite all that. So I don't think, the city definitely and the province hasn't announced any fuel strategy whatsoever. And I think that's an Achilles heel. We're only as strong as our weakest link. And I think that's the weakest link in this water shortage issue.
Benoit, I know that for example, sewage will become a big issue for homes once we start 50 liters per person per day, because we're getting less and less water into the system. Yeah. Now, I know that they did say they will keep the taps on in the business, but already seen how the lowered pressure has it's starting to leave more and more people without water. Yes. And I'm guessing this is just the start. We're gonna see a progressive increase in that. Will the sewage system become a problem for businesses as well? Is that another thing that they need to be concerned about?
Yes, look, it's getting the sewage through this from the generator to the sewage plant is going to be manifesting itself now. And the system is designed. It's a 200 dure or 300 dure design, and it's designed to flow with a certain amount of water. It's not designed at 50 liters per person per day. It's designed at about 150. So we're not going to get the sewage as we need. And the thing is, if we start flushing with things like seawater, all we're going to do, and if we would need a lot of it, 100, 200 megaliters a day, we are then going to ensure that the sewage works fails. The sewage works at the moment will be struggling. I don't have inside information, but will be struggling purely from experience, because the total solids loading will have increased and the organic load would have increased per unit volume, meaning that there's not enough water and the biology has to adapt, the equipment has to adapt, and what's going to happen is people say, well, there's less flow. But there's so much solid, so now you've got a puree that you've got to oxygenate with mechanical equipment that's not designed for that. So what's going to happen is the plants are going to be put under duress from a biological and a mechanical perspective. And that will get worse now with the lowered pressures because less flows will arrive. So the whole system gets out of balance, and it will get to a stage where it just doesn't operate satisfactorily anymore. So we're going to get more pollution. We're going to get mechanical failures, and the city has to stay on top of the health issues that are associated with that type of shutdown. I must just say that no city's gone through this in modern times. So there isn't a formula. Everybody's in the dark. Everybody's trying to get hold of best practice, but there's no real precedence in this. So there's a lot of what ifs. So what we need to do is to really plan in our little environments at home and at work and in our social environments, what are the worst things can happen, and work our way up and see what plans we can actually make. I think between this 50 litre to 25 litre a day, I think we will see a lot of business relocating their staff outside of the Western Cape, those who can. And I think 1 million people will leave the city, which will result over a period of time, next 3 to 4 weeks. And I think what that will do, it will lower the load onto the city, the demand load, but it's going to affect the economy quite badly. And there's things that are going to happen that we don't know. Nobody really knows. But if you don't have the awareness, we can't plan. So
Benoit,
if business doesn't plan, sorry?
Just wanted to ask you, if you don't mind, for the benefit of those who are listening. It's a question that people ask over and over, and I know that you did touch on it. Why can we not use seawater for the sewage system?
Okay. So in South Africa, we're pioneers in sewage treatment. We use an activated sludge process, which is a biological process that we break down the pollutants, and we give off things like CO2 and the likes as a byproduct. And that process has been adopted all over the world. It's world leading. It's a very good process. It doesn't operate in a highly saline environment. There are sewage plants that operate in a highly saline environment, but those bacteria are different. The process is different. And so we could in time switch over to if all the reticulation was replaced, about 60 billion rand is the number the city's been talking about. So the city will have to raise it through the ratepayers, but it's about 60 billion to replace the system and flush with seawater. And then the biology in the sewage works can be changed. But this is a 10 to 15-year project. This is not a 5-year project at all. Funding is an issue, A, and B, it takes about normally 5 to 10 years to plan, another 10 to 15 years. So seawater is toxic to the current environment. It's not toxic to bacteria. It's just the mix of bacteria that is used. So the system could be adapted. If we start going over to seawater, we will fairly rapidly destroy the bacteria and they won't recover.
Thanks for explaining that. I think the entire system's already taking some strain. Getting back to businesses, Benoit, for a company to become water resilient, what will it take? And considering where we are now, is there enough time for them to make a plan?
I think business shouldn't give up. What they should do is do the most they can before day zero, or too long on 50 liters per day, because I think that's quite a business dampener. Is each business has to look at what is their water footprint, where do they need water, where do their suppliers need water, and where do their customers need water. You're only as good as your suppliers and your customers, and then you've got your operations with your staff. And they have to look at all three of those legs and start examining it, and it becomes very complex. And each business is very different, but that process has to start. There's no use saying, I've got tanks and I'm fine and my staff is fine, when your suppliers don't, and they don't have staff, etc. So we have to start If you look at the automotive industry, very sophisticated supply chain, they really look after, and the food industry, they really look after the suppliers in meeting the specifications that they need to operate just in time. We need to do that from a water perspective, where water is South Africa's single biggest risk at the moment, apart from Eskom. You can probably put the two together, because you cannot make energy without water, and you can't move water around and purify it without energy. And those are two huge risks, and which are really potential dampeners to any economic recovery that we're thinking of. And we know the infrastructure for the last 20 years has not been kept up to pace. The government has acknowledged it's 800 billion in arrears. It was 2-3 years ago, 700 billion. The minister was trying to raise interest last year in a roadshow for private equity or private funding. So the numbers not being refuted by anybody, we need 800 billion into the water system, is not going to come from the fiscus that we know. There isn't funds there. So water is extremely important, apart from energy. But in actual fact, we should be looking at them as as one thing. And arid places like the Middle East have done this. The difference we have with those regions is that we are low GDP per capita. We're roughly an 8th or 10th GDP per capita. So we have very little money to do things, so we have to be super innovative, and I believe we do have that in us. Okay, we are still world leaders as water engineers. There's no doubt about it. It's just that we sell those ideas internationally, not in South Africa. That will change. I believe that will change. The demand will change there. But the water has to be put as a priority, not only in Cape Town, but nationally. It is a systemic risk, water and energy. And so risk management on the corporate side is going to have to adjust its models. And there isn't really any precedence if you look at the way our economy is structured, if you look at the way our water is nationalized in the Constitution, so it's a national resource, the way our rainfall is really limited to only a few places, a small surface area. It is seasonal, and what's happening is we're getting more rain in a shorter period of time. So the rainy seasons are shorter, even inland. There's a whole lot of things. We have to draw from experiences all over the world, but there's no one country that has exactly what we have. What we do know is civilizations have disappeared because of a lack of water. That we do know in Central America. And the thing is, I know Clem Sunter's been on the record, is that he said tops Cape Town would, the low road, which the indicators are that we're on, is there would be less than 1 million people, and fishing would be the main industry in Cape Town.
Benoit, question. One of the listeners here was saying, is telecommuting a way that we can mitigate the business risks? But my question there is, how resilient are our communications? Our telecoms, our mobile service providers, is that not another huge risk to our survival in Cape Town?
Yeah, our bandwidth is, we struggle here. Our bandwidth, I was in the Middle East 2 weeks ago, and our bandwidth is pathetic, is paying it a compliment. It's unreliable, and it's really, really slow. And it doesn't matter what speed you buy from your business premises to your home. It's at the exchanges where there's major issues in the core. The uninvestment in our core infrastructure is the same as was uninvested in water and energy and the likes. So but maybe that's the opportunity to push it, that it also becomes a priority. It's an Achilles heel, but I'm sure we can work over that. We've got a high penetration rate with mobile communications, and maybe that's going to be the way to go, and to rely less and less on telecom, for example, and go more the LTE way. I think there's a lot of good things that are going to come out of this crisis that's unfolding that we haven't thought about, purely because the opportunity arises and we have to make a plan.
But now it's not just day zero that we need to be focused on, because obviously day zero is not a day. It's going to be a period of time, and right now it's an unknown period. So what would you say, how should, when businesses work out their resilience plan, what should they plan for?
The city has mentioned 3 months. My calculations, remembering you're guessing, but my calculations are 6 to 9 months minimum, and that's with good rains bordering on floods for 3 months. Remember that the ground's going to soak everything for the first month or two, if it's the same rains as last year, or just normal rains. So, and the augmentation schemes are not progressing. There's only 22 megalitres a day of the 600, just under 600 being used. Remember, Cape Town used to use 800 in winter and 1,000 megalitres a day in summer. There's 22 online. The whole borehole story is not a silver bullet, and I think Anthony has gone through that in quite a bit of detail. So the augmentation schemes that were published last year, August, September, of 500 megalitres a day were an absolute lie. And to the extent that it's treason, the way that was put together. And if you have a look at it, there was even barges and there were ships that don't exist with 100, 200 megalitres a day of seawater desalination and things like that. The groundwater is supposed to be around about 100, 120, but they have to find ways of treating the groundwater before day zero. This could mean 20, 30 water treatment plants. Haven't been factored for, haven't been budgeted, and those have to be put in. So we don't have. They have to be put in. And look, if you really expedite things, you can get them in within four to 6 months. So I'm saying the water augmentation schemes are not going to materialize before the third or fourth quarter, where they can hit 150 megalitres a day, for example. That's going to extend, let's say day zero is inevitable. I think 50 litres per day is very close to day zero, really, if you look at it. If we hit the 25 litres per day, calculations are 30 person per day. So business has to survive. If you look at where we're at now, for the next year, the cautious plan would be for the next year to say, how do we survive on 25 litres per day per person, and how do we augment that where we need it in our business because it's not available locally, and what we do with our suppliers and what we do with our customers. How do we get this together?
Yeah, I think, we're really going to be in trouble when we hit 25, because as you said, our economy will come to a standstill because it's not 25 litres at the office, 25 litres at home. It's a cumulative amount.
Yes.
It's almost impossible to run a home on 25 litres of water, let alone trying to run a business on a portion of that 25 litres.
Yes.
I don't know, what the plan is. We won't, the big thing I think that we need to keep reiterating is that we shouldn't be focusing so much on the augmented water that's going to come online, because it's not enough. I think it's something like 10% roundabouts of our total usage.
At
roughly.
The moment, it's 22 over 585, I think. So it's not even 5%. And I think they're going to struggle to get to 10%. It needs time. It needs time and money. The money's not there, and time is time. So, there's no quick fix to a drought. It's a long-term issue. So the short-term resilience is going to have to be very innovative. And what we really have to also factor in is that people are going to be spending inordinate amount of time trying to survive off this lower amount of water. So that means that people will be less available for work. And the other thing is people are not going to be in the best frame of mind. And we've seen in social media a lot of irrational behavior already, and that's stress-induced. So after 3 days in Sandton, all the shops ran out of bottled water, and there were some ladies fighting in a well-known upper market store. because there was only a few bottles left. The whole of Gauteng didn't run out of water. It was just part of Sandton, not the whole of Sandton, because of a major pipeline under one of the landfills at Limbro that burst. So it doesn't take much for people to get stressed and to behave irrationally. And I think business needs to factor in that people will be stressed. So how do we de-stress them? And I think one thing is, we have a plan. What's the certainty? The business do this. You're not going to lose your job. We're going to do the best. We're going to relocate some people. We're going to keep some people here. And that certainty will de-stress a lot of the people, because that's the way we're wired. The certainty that we're starting to get from the cities addressing macro issues. We need to look at the micro issues from a perspective of being able to get to work and back with less water, and understanding that there's going to maybe be fuel restrictions, and that food prices are purely supply and demand priced, and they could also go up. And unemployment is increasing because of the agriculture sector that's been affected already with this year's harvest. And there's going to be, unfortunately, more of that happening. Tourism is already reported as, since 3 weeks ago, the tourism has come down already. That has a direct impact on labor-intensive work. Construction, I'm sure, is going to be affected. So society is going to get a bit more stressed, and what we can do at work anyway is try and overcome that as best as possible.
I totally agree with what you're saying. Benoit, if there are any companies out there who would like to use your services as a consultant to assist them in becoming resilient, how do they get in touch with you? Through my website, Enviro1, and also I'm pretty active on social media, and through LinkedIn. So there's a few platforms to be able to get hold of me. People are getting hold of me. Are they? Well, social media works very well. I learned very quickly a few years ago. It can be abused, but it's a very good tool. And what kind of companies do you consult to mainly? Are they sort of small to medium, larger enterprises, or are you happy to consult across the board? Across the board, I've been exposed, as you said in the intro, to many industry sectors. So across sectors, across the board, and really on a first come, first served basis. So that I'm not going to say I'm not going to do it in this sector or not in that sector, for example. And it's one's got to help as much as we can across as especially national companies, because one can have a big impact there. Port Elizabeth might run out of water long before Cape Town if it runs out of water. The only difference with Port Elizabeth is that it gets rain all year round. It's not just a winter rainfall area, but the prognosis is not very good. And there's very little media exposure down there. Yes, it's not 4 million people. I think it's 1.5 or 1.6 or 1.7 million people. But it's very dire because their storage system is even less resilient than the Western Cape one, which is not resilient. They've got about a year's storage in Cape Town, Western Cape, when it's full, which is not much, but it's all the area can really cater for. So there's also Port Elizabeth. But there's really a national issue, because in Gauteng, the water demand will exceed the supply without drought 2022. The Lesotho Highlands Water Project is the stopgap to import water from Lesotho, and that's been delayed by 3 years due to a host of reasons we don't need to discuss tonight. I'm lobbying very hard that we start level 3 or 4 restrictions in Gauteng from the end of this winter, so that people can start getting conditioned to reduce demand, so that we can make it to 2025. Another question, Benoit. A couple of people have asked me whether we currently supply any other countries with water. No, we've got treaties with our bordering countries, the international treaties. For example, there was a bit of, I term it fake news because it was very misleading in Botswana,
it was the equivalent of a few pubs put together as annual use. It was small amounts of bottled water. It wasn't an issue. It was totally put out of context. The only water that would be exporting would be in the form of wine. We're exporting, if I can't remember the numbers offhand, if it's 17 liters to make a liter of wine, then we're exporting 7 liters time, whatever it is. The water footprint of a product it's got nothing to do with drought. It has to be looked at very differently. But we are not great exporters except in our finished products. If you look at our minerals that we export, the golds, the platinums, the coals, and that, there's no moisture there really. So it'd really be in food stuff. So our fruit, our wine, and I don't believe we export bottled water apart from within SADC to small volumes. We do import a lot of bottled water, especially from Italy. The brands are very well known, a bit from France. I think, and if you put to value, you'll find our engineering expertise we export more of. Our water engineering expertise.
And another question, you touched on it earlier. Is there any doubt that we have sufficient expertise in our country to get through day zero and beyond? Are we needing to look elsewhere for engineers and scientists, or do we have sufficient expertise in South Africa?
I think what we're lacking of is project memory. Like Eskom had to, the main contracts with Eskom are it's imported technology and teams, expats, because we hadn't built for two decades or 2.5 decades, we hadn't built a six-pack like we're doing in Medupi and Kusile. So we didn't have the project memory. I think where we're lacking is our research is about half of what it should be. It's the first thing. So Water Research Commission, it's underfunded. So we're getting less out there from a scientific perspective. I think when it comes to project memory in putting in infrastructure, major infrastructure, we have the same problem across that we have in Eskom, because water infrastructure is complex. So I think we are suffering there, not the same, but to an extent. And I think a lot of the engineering, procurement and contracting companies, their water portfolio has decreased over the last 2 decades because of underinvestment by government principally. So what's happened is there is less expertise, specialist expertise, for example, in desalination and various ultrafiltration, for example, we're quite good at. And I think we have quite a lot of expertise also within the mining environment to dewater mines. And we are world leaders in acid mine drainage, AMD, where I've done some audits and, to look at whether the projects did fulfill what they were strategically designed to do. So technically, budget and from a statutory perspective. And we're able to recover, nobody's done this in the world, 99% of the feed stream using seawater desalination membranes. So we're able to do that through, and there are patents around this, and we are the world leaders in acid mine drainage treatment using membranes, because it is the most cost-effective way apart from passive ways. So using, it's virtually identical to what is being done for seawater desalination. The only difference is the pressures are a bit lower, but the principles are really the same. So we still have some pockets of excellence. So I have no doubt we're able to do quite a lot. But typically what happens with major infrastructure projects, if we have to do the 800 billion over 10 years, 80 billion a year, a third of the project implementation teams will be expats. And that's not abnormal, not the other way around. So I think we do, and what would happen, that would suck in a lot of the engineers that are either unemployed, underutilized, or not trained specifically in water, and the disciplines of the civil engineering disciplines, the mechanical engineering disciplines around that. That would stimulate a lot, I think, a lot of engineering expertise, which with time people would get that project expertise and memory reset into them. So I think there's no country that does everything on their own. I think we're getting more and more dependent on outside help for major projects, but we do have the core capability. In 10, 15 years, I think the impact will be quite drastic because a lot of us will have retired. So there is a gap. There's and we see it in the power generation side. There's a huge gap of 20 years. So we've got a lot of engineers below 35 and a lot over 55. There's a gap in between. And that's going to hit us in the next decade, but we know it. And multinationals will take advantage of that if we don't start.
So we've got a lot of work to do ahead of us in the next couple of months. It's going to be challenging. I think we probably would do well to just accept the fact that it's going to be challenging. And I think many has said, there's no silver bullet. We're kind of flying blind. There's no manual for what we're going through, unfortunately. And I don't think anyone can come through this unscathed. It's going to affect every aspect of our lives. Every aspect of business will be affected.
But we have to, as a resilient species, innovate ourselves through the crisis, plan for the worst, and take advantage of the experiences, learn from that, and then be able to hopefully mitigate what's happening in the rest of the country with the lessons learned. And I'm a great believer that we can do that. But we need to start. And I think tomorrow, the 50 liters per day is, to me, the start of the economic meltdown or deindustrialization of the Western Cape. And only we as people can stop that and work towards mitigating the risk as far as possible and then overcoming them with time. Because time will heal a lot of things. There will be better rains in time, more augmentation projects in, etc., and more money, but that's going to take time. So in 2 years' time, the economy might well start recovering, but it's not going to be rest unaffected for the next year. It's definitely going to be affected, and resilience will pull us through. And there are other areas that need to be built up too. So the Eastern Cape does have issues, and KZN is not far off, and Gauteng, because of urbanization, and if people do leave the Western Cape and come to the head offices here, will put even more pressure on Gauteng's water. And we have serious issues. Joburg is running out of water every day. They just can't supply more, and Rand Water can't give them more. So we're reaching our limit, but we knew that. So I think we're going to increase awareness, reduce our water footprints, and become innovative, and use that into other parts of Africa where there are similar problems in East Africa at the moment. So we can export our water resilience project experience. So I think there's a lot of positives that will come out of this unfortunate situation.
I think that's a great note to end off the broadcast this evening. The fact that attitude matters. And if we look at our situation with a positive attitude and say that, this is an opportunity for us to innovate, an opportunity for us to write our own textbook, our own manual, so that we look back and we say, never again. We now have a manual. We will not let this happen, not only to Cape Town, but any other city in South Africa. And we'll have a manual for other countries, because this is not a South African phenomena. It's happening all over the world. So we have an excellent opportunity here to prove that we can survive this.
Yeah. Once we've acknowledged the problem, we're halfway to sorting it out. So we have to get out of denial, and I think we're getting out of it very quickly.
Yes, nothing like a rude awakening, is there?
It's rather rude.
Benoit, thank you so much for your time. And thank you everyone for joining us. We'll be back next week, same time. We will post that ahead of time, what our topic will be next week. So thank you everyone for joining us. Please share this, because the whole idea of these broadcasts is awareness. There's too little awareness of what's happening. And the more we can share and talk about this conversation, the more we will help ourselves in the process. So thanks everyone. Benoit, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Good night.